Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on July 21st, 2025. You are tuning in for the first day of the 5-day Tribal Council Roles and Responsibilities under NAHASDA webinar series with your instructor, Cheryl A. Cosley, who's principal of Cheryl A. Cosley and Associates, Housing Consulting and Management Services. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could tune in for today's webinar. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Cheryl has put together a really extensive list of resource items for you. So just know that you can find those in the courses section here on the learning platform. And that's also where you'll be able to find all of the webinar recordings moving forward. When you want to join for day 2, day 3, day 4, and day 5, you'll just log in like you did today, and you'll click on that green banner at the top of the screen. We ask that you join with listen-only capabilities because it just helps us to cut down on audio feedback for our instructor. And if you joined and you found that the sound is coming out of the wrong device, you can always switch that by clicking on the little telephone icon at the bottom of your screen. It'll pull up a list of your mic and your speaker devices. So if you need to switch to your headphones or maybe a Bluetooth speaker, you can do so that way. We do, of course, encourage class participation. We want to know your questions. We want to know your comments. If you have any tech support issues that I can help you navigate through, you can do this here as well. We're going to rely primarily on the public chat. So if you don't have that open, you can click on public chat in the messages panel, and that'll open a chat between you, me, the moderator, as well as your instructor. If you need to ask a question or make a statement, you can just click in that box that says send messages to public chat, type what you want to say, and then you can hit enter, or you can click on that little paper airplane button to submit it in. And then with Cheryl's presentations, she usually will answer your questions as she goes through. So we're going to try to save questions for the end. But if you wanted to kind of just send your question into the chat to make sure that it's not forgotten, feel free to do that, please. All right. Before I hand it off to Cheryl, if we could go ahead and get that chat box going together, you can go ahead and open your public chat and let us know your name, where you're tuning in from. It's fun to see all the different tribal nations that are represented on the webinar, your work or your role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation, if you have one. You might be a tribal employee and not have tribal affiliation. That's okay too. And then while y'all are getting the chat box going, just a quick final note. Try your best not to click on that little red menu panel that's all the way to the far left of your screen. Just know that if you click on it, it is going to pull you out of the webinar and take you to whatever you chose on the menu. You can always just rejoin by clicking on that green banner, but I just want to give you a heads up that it will pull you out. And then there is a copy of today's presentation slides for you in the chat. There is a link to the PDF if you want to open that as Cheryl's going through her presentation. All right. It's with great pleasure that I introduce today's webinar instructor, Cheryl Cosley. And Cheryl, I have made you presenter now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, let me see if I can. So this is brought to you courtesy of the Native Learning Center and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We fall under Native American programs. So I do really hope you enjoy the next 5 days and come back every day. Good afternoon. Sending up smoke and prayers. I just did go and smudge. That's how we usually open up in Indian country. My name is Cheryl Cosley. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I am Loon Clan, and in my language, I'm from Bay Mills, and I come from Kenoshinconning, which means the place of the pike. We're the Bay Mills Indian community. We're located at the top of Michigan, and our waters actually border Canada. And we're a Ojibwe or Chippewa. I served as director of housing for my tribe for over 28 years. During that time, I served as the chairperson for the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association for 7 years. At different periods. There's 31 tribes surrounding the Great Lakes there. And I was also very honored to serve on the board of directors for the National American Indian Housing Council. I did 16 years. I started out as a secretary, became the vice chair, and then I was a 2-term chairwoman. So I was very, very lucky to get to spend the majority of my career in Indian country helping our tribes. I started Cheryl A. Causley and Associates in March of 2019, and I provide training and technical assistance virtually and in person. A lot. I'm all over the country. I just got back, and I'm very, very, like I said, lucky. So I go through the lower 48 and Alaska. I've got a couple of my students in the class that I see in the background right now. So welcome, and an old friend, Joe. So I hope you guys really, really enjoyed this class. I've been doing this since 1990. That tells you kind of how old I am. So my information is at the beginning and at the end. Please feel free to reach out and give me any questions that you guys have. You know, in the upcoming months even, I always try to answer any of my, former students. So this particular class is actually for tribal council members, but oftentimes you'll have people that need to know what their responsibilities are. As I know one of my students is looking at here, what do I need to provide the tribal council also? So this is what this course is about, and it'll give you the history of NAHASDA, some of those federal rules and regulations that we had to adhere to when we're accepting that money, and the requirements that we have to have in place to run that successful program. So as Brooke so kindly stated, there are 31 sets of reference materials in here. The first 3 are the ones that you need to primarily focus on. These are the rules, okay? When you go to Code Talk on the HUD website, that's how you pull them down. As for, the third one, Part 200 Uniform Administrative Requirements, the NAHASDA regulations, those get updated. The statute pretty much stays the same, but the statute is the first place you go to learn about our programs, to learn if you can do something. Then you go to the regulations, our program guidances, our PIH notices, and then those uniform administrative requirements. Those are the same rules that your tribe falls under. So your procurement policy could be exactly like theirs, as well as the audit requirements. So Part 200 is basically all components finance. And my least favorite of all of the documents, because it wasn't written especially for housing. So there's a lot of other things in here. We'll talk about them, and you'll see why you'll need them over the next couple of days. But they're very important documents to be able to get your hands on to make sure that you're in compliance. For instance, 11, total development cost. We have to build moderate housing. This tells you how much you're allowed to spend in your area. There's a policy status table. Conflict of interest in housing admissions. As tribal council, board of commissioners, and even your housing staff, you have to make sure that you're following those protocols when anybody applies and they have a relationship with any of your decision makers. Tribal wage rates, you can put those into place as a tribal council. There's a lot of these things that are going to be tribal decisions. And this is one of them. In lieu of Davis-Bacon, you can implement a tribal wage rate. So there's things like that in here, calculating annual income, assisting non-low income families. And I just realized that document under number 6 should say 25. It has been updated as of June. No, I'm wrong. That's the calculations for, that's a newer document. Number 5 is the 2025 income limits. If you haven't changed your income limits from 2024 to 25, there's the brand new ones. I apologize, I made a mistake there. Useful life and binding commitments. This is really important. We got a lot of slippage in Indian country about things like that. Something addressing the stipends that are paid. Monitoring plans, because you guys are responsible for making sure self-monitoring is done on the behalf of your organization. So these are just a few of them, but they're really, really good documents. They've been documenting or updating our documents. The Federal Financial Report, SF 425, is updated. The administrative requirements for investing our block grant funds was updated this year. The federal supply sources, our GSA purchasing, that's updated. So there's some good notices in here that if you haven't, been there in a while, they have been updated. So today we're going to do a NAHASDA overview, basically, an overview of the statute, the regulations, and how to navigate. Talk about your housing program structure and some of those federal labor standards, Davis-Bacon, those other labor requirements. They all fall under the NAHASDA statute under the activities under subpart A. You can read yourself what we're going to go through the rest of the year, or the rest of the week, excuse me. I don't want to run us too far behind because this is, we don't get very long in it. There's a lot of material to cover. So the first part is the NAHASDA overview, the overview of the statute and the regulations. This is what the statute looks like. It stands for the Native American Housing and Self-Determination Act of 1996. It's color-coded, actually, when you pull it up by the days that it was amended. So the objectives are in there, to assist and promote affordable housing, self-sufficiency, plan and integrate infrastructure, promote private capital markets, some of those, better access to mortgage markets. And then there's the national objectives that go hand in hand with that, to assist with promoting affordable housing activities within Indian country, safe, healthy environments on our reservations and other Indian areas for occupancy by low-income Indian families. That's the bottom line. We are appropriated that money for low-income Native Americans. That's what everything basically falls back to, and a lot of the decisions that you're going to make are because that's the way we get their money. To ensure better access to private mortgage markets, Indian tribes for the members, promote that self-sufficiency, plan and integrate for infrastructure, coordinate activities to provide for housing, to promote that self-sufficiency, and capital markets within Indian country, and allow those markets to operate and grow, benefiting our Indian community. And then, of course, you have the congressional findings that come with that. And the federal government is acknowledging that responsibility they have to promote the general welfare of the nation as a whole, using federal resources to help our families and individuals seeking affordable housing, especially those who cannot fully provide for themselves. Developing effective partnerships between the federal government, our states, our tribes, and our local governments, so this is an acknowledgement of some of their responsibilities. And then the congressional findings about that unique relationship between the government and the United States and the governments of our particular tribes, that unique federal responsibility to our Indian people. The Constitution speaks to that, Indian affairs, treaties, statutes, and those historical relationships with our tribes and that trust responsibility. And, through the treaties and statutes, the general course of dealings with our tribe, that, they have that trust responsibility for the protection and preservation of our tribes and for working with us to improve housing conditions and our socio-economic status. So those are some of the congressional findings found within NAHASDA, and that recognition that we have a need for affordable housing within our Alaskan villages and our native lands for our people, and that we need to provide that affordable housing, safe, healthy environments, things like that. So that is a brief overview of NAHASDA, and that statute is broken down by title. So when you go to search things, that's the first place you scan, the block grant requirements, what are our affordable housing activities, the allocation of the grant amounts, compliance, audits, reports, termination of assistance, federal guarantees for financing, and some of those housing activities, other housing assistance. And then the last part is written for our brothers and sisters in Hawaii. It's the housing assistance for our native Hawaiians. So to find that statute, that is an active link. It has been updated, as I said, but the best way is to always go into Code Talk, and I'll show you that in a couple of minutes. So this speaks also to NAHASDA, you know, how many times it has been touched, you know, those transition notices, the reference materials, and things like that. And those are active within there. As I said, it's color coded by amendment every time that, you know, that it was altered. And this is a list of some of them. And then that overview, it basically reorganized the way that we started providing housing. Prior to 1996, we were under the 1937 Housing Act. The 1937 Housing Act, we competed for our housing. There was no block grant there. We had a baseline appropriation, and then, like I said, there was a competition present. We weren't allowed to help our over-income tribal members. We weren't allowed to do certain things that we're allowed to under this program. But the housing that we did compete for came with the subsidy attached to it for our mutual help units, for our rental units, and your rental units should still have those attached. You need to preserve those. We'll talk about that later on in the week. Those are probably the most important stock that you have. Overview of NAHASDA, it reorganized the system for housing assistance, you know, provided to Native Americans through HUD. The block grant programs authorized, the Title VI loan guarantee program, and then, like I said, our program for our brothers and sisters in Hawaii, the Native Hawaiian and Housing Block Grant of 2000. So it is a now formula-based grant program. We also have Title VI, which provides financing guarantees for tribes through private market loans to develop affordable housing. It was amended in 2000 to add our Native Hawaiians, and the regulations for the Hawaiians are actually published at 24 CFR Part 1006. So the key points: it was signed into law in October of 96. It provides a grant directly to the tribes, so we no longer have to be a separate entity. Under the 37 Act, we had to be a housing authority. We had to be separate from the tribes. Now it's a tribal decision. It is a decision of you as the tribal council. Do you want to become a department, or do you want to stay as you are and become a TDHE or stay a TDHE? So TDHE is a tribally designated housing entity used for activities defined in your annual IHP, your Indian Housing Plan. You put that together on a yearly basis. This is the amount of money we have. This is what we're going to do with that money. It defines the TDHE as the existing Indian housing authority that was established for purposes under the 1937 Housing Act. Tribes can also now establish other entities through self-governance powers or state law and make it a tribal department if they would like. It permits the tribe to set a maximum rent, okay, that does not exceed 30% of the monthly adjusted income. That is probably the second, well, depending on what seat you're in, the other really, really important piece of information: you are not allowed under any circumstance to charge a family over 30% of their monthly adjusted income if they are at or below 80% of the income published. If they owe you money, you know, that part doesn't count in the calculation. If they fall between 80 and 100%, you can charge them more. In some cases, you have to charge them more. But if they're at or below 80%, we are not allowed to charge them more. Okay, so you have to be really careful there. 30% of zero is zero. So don't get in trouble doing that. So it requires the tribe to use the block grant to operate, maintain their current housing units, distributes that grant through an allocation formula developed under negotiated rulemaking. We'll talk about that later. It authorizes a federal loan guarantee program that the tribe can use with the secretary's approval. It is a federal guarantee to undertake affordable housing activities that do not exceed 5 times the amount of the need portion of your tribe's block grant program. Reauthorizes the Indian Housing Loan Guarantee Program. It extended our leasehold interest in trust and restricted land for housing purposes for up to 50 years. It expands our affordable housing activities, requires HUD to monitor to make sure that there is no non-compliance, to take steps when that non-compliance does not occur or does occur. And it specifically addresses our families who are above low income. And if we would like to help them, there's 3 different mechanisms that we can actually use, and we'll talk about those. Those are for your essential families, your law enforcement, and your 10% authority is what that is called. So the key points, the block grant is used to operate and maintain your current housing units. It is used and can be used for development, rehab, acquisition, housing support services, counseling, loan processing, to initiate model housing programs. And it distributes our block grant through an allocation formula, which is developed under negotiated rulemaking. That Title VI that I talked about, that is the federal guarantee for financing. Title VI loan guarantee is to assist a recipient called the borrower, so us basically, because we receive loans, who want to finance eligible affordable housing activities but are unable to basically secure financing without the assistance of a federal guarantee. It's a pledge by the government to repay all or a portion of our unpaid principal balance, should we borrow that money, and accrued interest, for an obligation by our borrower to a lender after default. The regulations are published at CFR Part 1000, Subpart E, and we as a borrower leverage our block grant funds, or can leverage our block grant funds, to finance affordable housing activities today by pledging our future grants as security. So they'll just come back, and if you breach that agreement, they'll take it out of your allocation on a yearly basis until that's paid back. Okay, so that is a program that is, out there. Brooke, can you hear me?
Yes, and I have made you presenter once again. You're good to go.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what happened there. So Title VI federal guarantees, like I said, that is a program that is available for us should we need that and want to borrow funds using that particular mechanism. So we also have the 184 loan guarantee program. That program we can utilize as a housing entity or our tribal members. So for instance, we on Bay Mills utilize the 184 program anywhere within the state of Michigan. It allows HUD to guarantee loans secured by our Indian families, by our housing entities, the TDHEs, the tribes, to buy or construct single family housing units. You can, build up to 4 at a time. Those properties located within Indian country, but it was one of the first products that were available on our trust land. But you don't have to be on trust land to utilize that, nor do you have to be low income. The regulations are published at 24 CFR Part 1005. Like I said, trust land is not the only eligible land for a Section 184 program. The land located within an Indian area or Alaska Native area are eligible locations for that 184 guaranteed home loan. It is a wonderful program for our people to utilize. And you can get more information there at 2004-19 or right on the Code Talk website. So I referred to negotiated rulemaking. I said when they basically do anything with the NAHASDA statute, or they do anything to our formula, our allocation of our monies, they have to convey what they call negotiated rulemaking. It's a process of developing regulations mandated by Section 106 of the NAHASDA statute. It requires HUD to use negotiated rulemaking when they're developing our regulations or altering our allocation formula. The regulation are developed by communities of tribal and HUD representatives. So they basically want a selection, you know, of our people within all of our HUD regions. They like to see, you know, people from the rancherias, from the pueblos, from the Alaskan villages, the large land-based tribes, the smaller tribes. They like everybody sitting at the table for that. The regulations are developed, you know, by those representatives. There's actually a link to some of the approved documents from each session available here, should you want that. And those regulations that they're negotiating were, you know, they replaced the Housing Act of 1937, and they set forth the policies and procedures of the administration of this particular NAHASDA program. So if Congress should reauthorize NAHASDA, they would convey negotiated rulemaking. If somebody, you know, wants to, if they want to do something to our formula or change any of our rules, HUD will call for committee formation. They do so by announcing it in the Federal Register. They put it out for a period of time, and you express your interest, and then they will form that committee based on, you know, who actually applies. They schedule the meetings, and they can take place over a couple of years. So it's not like a bang, bang, bang thing. They put forth your product, and they will propose the rule and publish that again in the Federal Register for whatever work document that they're looking at. And then they will put it out for that public comment. After those public comments are received, they'll put out that final rule, and it'll be published. If they need further clarification, if, you know, the announcement, they'll put out, HUD will put out, they will publish their guidances and notices to make sure that all of Indian country realizes what's happening there. So we've been reauthorized starting in 1999 and 2010, you know, so there's been several periods of meetings and reauthorizations. But right now we've been a long time. They're trying to get it permanently reauthorized, but I don't know if that'll be happening in the near future. The NAHASDA regulations under 24 CFR Part 1000 is the second place you're going to go to learn if you're allowed to do something, to give you clarification about your programs. It again replaced the rules from the 1937 Act and sets forth the policies and procedures for the administration of your programs. Now, those have been amended many times. And you can see when you look at it, it's when the last time that it has been reauthorized. So I've got all three documents right now sitting right there. I literally use them all the time. I pull them off of the screen, but sometimes it's just easier to print them like this and use them. So like this one was last amended on the 12th of June, but this is my copy, and it was printed on the 26th. So it might have been changed, you know, again, since then. You keep your most updated, you know, versions printed and computer, and that's where all your rules are. So, you know, for instance, our procurement, or not our procurement, our auditing, our threshold got raised. I was telling Brooke about it before we started. I haven't seen a document come out from HUD saying, okay, they raised this threshold, but it's in the 200 document. So you just have to constantly be on there looking. As 1990, and I'm still learning every week. I'm learning something new that has changed within our programs. So the NAHASDA rules at 24 CFR 1000 are again like the statute broke down within subparts. The general objectives are allowable affordable housing activities, the Indian housing plan, the allocation formula, federal guarantees for financing, you know, those housing guarantees. And then the last component is recipient monitoring, our compliance, and our oversight and our accountability. The regulations, like A, will talk about the legal authority, the federal laws that impact NAHASDA. So in case you didn't know, NAHASDA will be or is one of the most heavily regulated programs that your tribe will offer. I mean, we need to know a lot to be able to run a successful housing program and to be compliant. You'll see a sampling about that over the next 5 days. Just the NAHASDA rules are not the only ones that we have to comply with. Then it talks about, besides the federal laws that impact NAHASDA that we have to follow, the conflict of interest, program provisions that apply. We have conflict of interest in the administration of our contracts because they're federal funds, and in the placement of our tribal people within our programs to make sure that there's no conflict with the decision makers of the tribe. The key terms used within the regulations, then it describes our affordable housing activities, the regulations, the amendments, some of those eligible activities, and our beneficiaries, cost and payment limits, talks about your existing housing stock. So C talks about your Indian housing plan, the requirements. You need to do that in order to get your money on a yearly basis. D talks about the formula. E talks about the federal guarantees of financing, our tribal housing activities, the terms. And then F again goes into the monitoring and the compliance and the performance and the reports. HUD review of our program, tribal review and your responsibilities, and some of the remedies for non-compliance. There's key regulations. So whenever you look, you'll see the number 1000 when you're looking at these documents, and then you find the number and you click on it and it'll bring you right there. So the definitions, the non-discrimination, relocation, real property acquisition, another set of rules we have to learn about, as well as our environmental review requirements. We have the administrative requirements, the conflict of interest, our record retention, how long we have to keep what. Affordable housing, eligible affordable housing activities, tenant project-based rental assistance if we want to offer that, who our eligible families are, the families that require HUD approval, conditions for a non-low-income family's participation, the rules that you'll have to follow, tribal and Indian preference or tribal preferences. We're allowed to set those within our A&O policy for selecting families for housing. Other laws, the uniform administrative requirements found at 2 CFR Part 200. That's the other document that, this is the one that the tribe has to use. And it's even much thicker. This is the one that we don't know all the time when they make changes in it. So you have to constantly scan the new copies to see if they've put a change in there that reflects our procurement or our audits or anything finance related in there. And that often happens. We have to follow the GAP, is our generally accepted accounting principles. And we also have to adhere to the Uniform Relocation Act. So we have a hierarchy of rules. NAHASDA is a law instituted by Congress as well as NEPA. That is, if it says you have to do it, it's a do not pass go. You have to do it. Then we have our regulations that help us implement those. 24 CFR Part 1000, the one I was just referring to. 2 CFR Part 200, those are the uniform allocation. That's the finance components. 24 CFR 50 and 58, those are our environmental components. Our program guidances and our PIH notices. Then you have your tribal codes that you also have to adhere to, your wage ordinances, your housing ordinances, program policies, and then your standard operating procedures. It gets interesting. There's a whole lot of rules that we have to adhere to. So as far as compliance, under admissions and occupancy, 1,104 to 110 talk about, some of them. They're also addressed in several other sections, as well as the management and personnel is addressed under our 2 CFR Part 200. Our maintenance provisions under NAHASDA. Travel, again, is that finance component. So that's under 2 CFR Part 200. Procurement. real property acquisition, relocation, conflict of interest, general procurement standards, Indian preference, labor standards, environmental clearance, lead-based paint rules, accessibility, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and then flood insurance on our properties if we're building or assisting. So the 2 CFR 200 uniform administrative requirements were to ensure the accountability of all the federal funding. The Office of Management and Budget, they established those uniform administrative requirements, our cost principles, our audit requirements for our federal awards to non-federal entities. So the regulations implementing NAHASDA include a variety of administrative requirements that we have to follow. 2 CFR Part 200 actually replaced some of the guidances that we oftentimes cited in some of our documents and our policies, some of the HUD documents, some of our policies. And they started with OMB Circular A87. Those were the cost principles. Or the OMB Circular A102, the uniform administrative requirements that were codified for our HUD programs. So as tribal council, especially if you don't have a board of commissioners, you are responsible to make sure that your policies are up to date. You're certifying that you have them in place and they're up to date every time that you submit your IHP or your APR. So make sure they are. Those particular documents are in your finance components mainly, or in your procurement. And should any of your policies quote any of those A numbers, you're out of whack. They have to be updated. So 2 CFR Part 200 has replaced all of those documents, So if they reference any of those prior regulatory documents, you need to, update your policies immediately. So 2 CFR Part 200 streamlined those federal government's guidances. There was 8 of them into this one particular document. Okay, so it again is broke up into subparts, acronyms, definitions, general provisions, pre-federal award requirements, contents of awards, post-federal, cost principles, audit requirements. It covers your accounting, your property management, your procurement management, your personnel, your travel management, and your records management, as well as all of these. So it requires management systems, written policies and procedures, insurance on the dwellings that you own, and insurance on the dwellings that you assist with over $5,000 of NAHASDA funds. The drug-free workplace requirements, procurement, reporting, record keeping, conflict of interest, auditing, allowable and unallowable cost, and those mandatory disclosures. So the uniform administrative requirements, those cost principles, they do not provide specific procedural requirements for us or the required components, but our management systems, they issue broad basic standards. So we as a recipient, you as a governing decision maker, non-federal entity, you are the ones, or we are the ones responsible for creating those details, those policies, those people, those operational procedures, the forms, and the documents of that adequate management system. So designing, installing, and implementing that adequate management system becomes the essential work of your executive director and your management. So that is, again, a link right there to Part 200 of the Uniform Administrative Requirements. So if people aren't, especially if you're a brand new director, I know we have one in the audience. This is a 9-part series that HUD put out on YouTube. And they're like 10 to 12 minute clips, but it kind of helps you understand that particular guidance, 2 CFR Part 200. When you are reading our uniform guidance, they're very precise with some of their terms, should and must. Should means it's a best practice. Must means that it is required. So, you're going to have to learn about that one. Even though it's my least favorite, we have to dig into that. So the guidance into our NAHASDA, overview. These are our basic 4 books and required document use. So to understand the program requirements, you understand how to research the statute, the regulations, 24 CFR Part 1000, our PIH notices and our program guidances, and then 2 CFR Part 200 uniform administrative requirements. So I should have had it sitting here. This is my program guidances. I have PIH notices sitting over there that are just as big. I had them for and at work, and I still do that because you need them as the rules. You put them in there by year. You can see them like this. Kill a tree, or you could do like I did and just start printing them off as they come by year. And then you'll be able to find them quite easily. Our website has been moved around a lot over the last couple of months. They're trying to rebuild it right now, but there has been frustration in finding things in a timely manner. But you can find it. You can always reach out. People like me have hard copies of everything, and your HUD people. Always do not, call your HUD office. They are there to help you if you ever need anything. But those are the things that we have to understand and realize and know how to utilize to be able to follow all of our rules. So, again, you start with that statute. The difference between all of these things, a statute is a federal law written by Congress. It can only be changed by an act of Congress, and it cannot be waived because it is a law instituted by Congress. Therefore, as I said, if it tells you have to do it there, you have to do it. The regulations at CFR Title 24, Part 1000, the difference, the regulations were written to implement the statutes. They can be waived by a departmental secretary. In our case, it will be, HUD, Department of Native American Programs. And you can read about that in the regulations at 1008. They are usually administered, they are, in our case, by the federal agency designated in the statute to oversee the program. So HUD and the department are HUD and Native American Programs. So the difference between, the statute and the regulations, well, when the negotiated rulemaking committee was charged with drafting the regulations, it was decided that they would not reinstate any information that was already stated within the NAHASDA statute unless the statute was not clear. Okay, so nothing that we have is duplicative. It'll refer you from one to the other, but you're not going to really find the same content. You have to be able to refer both to the statute and the regulations simultaneously to have that complete understanding of NAHASDA. The part that I always said used to drive me crazy, it still drives me crazy. The regulations are written in a question and answer format. And I'll get halfway through there and that is not the question that I have, So it's written in a question and answer format to address the provisions of the statute necessary to implement NAHASDA. Our guidance bulletins and notices, as I said, there's a lot of them. And the thing is, for instance, we still have guidances and bulletins that we have to use or utilize that go back to 2002. So just because you see an old age on there does not mean that it has been updated. It could very well be the current updated guidance. When you do get to it, and you go over to the guidance within the EWONAP website, when you go in within Code Talk, there's a search bar up there, and you can search, and it'll pull it up all the times over the years. So that's helpful to you. The EWONAP Program Guidance 2010, we had things a lot easier way back when. Everything we had to do came through the mail. As long as you opened your mail, you knew that they changed the rules. Okay. Not anymore. Nothing. It got to the point pre-COVID where almost everything we had to grab electronically or do electronically, except, our formula, things like that, that used to come to our desk. Not anymore. Everything we have to reach out and grab ourselves. So those guidance bulletins, those notices, they're issued periodically. They're available electronically, on that website, the Code Talk website. The guidance bulletins assist the tribes to implement their IHBG program, provide tools for our program management. They help us clarify our technical topics. To the extent the guidance bulletins are advisory, they're designed to help our tribes implement the programs. There are no waivers needed. The guidance bulletins and notices help illustrate both the statute and the regulations. The guidance bulletins further explain our regulations or statute. The waiver provisions regarding those documents hold true. Okay, so the HUD notices, they're official transmittals to us as recipients, typically regarding policy or procedural topics. The information in the HUD notices can be waived by our Assistant Secretary of Native American Programs unless it relates to the regulations or the statutes. So this is a picture, basically, of what a notice looks like. Now, they're called a PIH or a PIHN. In the last couple of years, they added the N to that. Those are the ones that apply to us. The PIH stands for Public and Indian Housing. Otherwise, sometimes you'll jump onto the HUD website and you get completely overwhelmed because it's not our HUD. It's not the Office of Native American Programs. It's the public side. And while some of their documents can be useful to us, none of them legally apply. We have our own set. So you always look for the PIH or PIHN. Now, under this restructuring in the last couple of months, they have some of theirs that don't apply to us on our website. So don't be confused with that. Look for the PIH or the PIHN. In the past, the only thing that was up there had to do with Indian housing. And hopefully that's, they're taking suggestions right now that they'll go back to that mechanism. So those notices, those guidance documents are not hard copied anymore, and they are posted on, that's a live link there to the Code Talk website. This is what a program guidance looks like, should you utilize that? Those are very helpful for explaining things to us. So the statute, the regs, the notices, the guidance bulletins, they work together to provide us our full picture of our opportunities and our responsibilities. So the PIH notices are issued by the Assistant Secretary for Public and Indian Housing. Our program guidances are issued by our Deputy Assistant Secretary for Native American Programs. Everything is available through the HUD.gov Code Talk site. You can click on PIH notices or program guidances, and you can go back all the way to the beginning of time. Okay. Those are the links for all of them and for the HUD.gov Code Talk. Now, there is a section in there called the Dear Tribal Leader Letters. Now, today the class is for Tribal Council. NAHASDA roles and responsibilities for the Tribal Council. You definitely need to go into the Dear Tribal Leader Letters section. This place always makes me want to stutter when I say that. But should you be an executive director, I know there's a couple in here. I see them. I see a couple instructors in here, different things like that. You need to go to the Dear Tribal Leader Letters section, regardless of your position, because that's where they put a lot of our pertinent information in there. Okay, so definitely do that. Definitely scroll over to the PIH notices, see if there's any updated ones since the last time you got on there. Go to the program guidances, see if there's anything updated there. And then just read it as a whole, okay? That's where you get all of, and the links to, the statute, the regulations, and things like that. So as of probably about a month ago, this is what the website changed to. This is what it looked like. I think it still does. The easiest way for me to find things is go to ONAP A to Z, and you click on that, and then it'll bring you over to this. So this, talks about our competitive, because there's money that we can still actively compete for within our programs. The Indian Community Development Block Grant, for instance. As tribal council, if your tribe is not putting in for this money, encourage your housing entity to do that. You can't both do it within the same year. Our tribe would let us do it 1 year, the tribe would do it 1 year. But the uses of the money benefit both sets of you. They're all housing related. COVID-19, tribal HUD and VASH programs, the Section 184, Title VI, and then the Hawaiian. But that ONAP A to Z, you click on that, that's where it's the easiest way right now to find things. It'll talk to you about the ONAP, best practices by different activities, things like that. You can see what other tribes are doing. Consultation, the Dear Tribal Leader letters, environmental resources. This is another place as a tribal leader that you can help your housing entity. If you have an environmental resource staff for your tribe, biologists, whatever, that do that on behalf of your tribe, lend them to your housing authority. And when I say lend them, I mean, please don't charge them. That's less money that you can help build housing with when you have to pay different programs, as well as your tribal attorneys. We need, anytime we touch a lease, anytime we get policies approved, they got to go through the eyes of your legal staff. Our contracts when we're building, things like that. So those are areas where you can really, really help out your tribal program, okay? When it comes to providing free legal help when they need it, the environmental staff, if you have them, lending them out, that can be really, really helpful. Making sure that your police department works hand in hand with your housing entity, lets them know if they go in on a call and they go in one of the units and they're trashed or there's holes in the wall. Ours always would send out, they would let us know the next day. I'd get a phone call. Hey, Cheryl, we were in here and this was, I think you need to go over and, check things out. There's different places, getting on the BIA roads list to make sure that the roads are maintained within your housing projects, things like that. As a tribal leader, you can really help out. Your meeting minutes, okay? Our meeting minutes are hugely important, okay? Every time that we have a HUD monitoring or we have an audit, they ask for our meeting minutes. They look at the conduct during the meeting. They look at what we were authorized to do. If you have your director and they say, well, we were instructed to do this, well, show me in the meeting minutes where they told you to do this, okay? So as a governing body, should you ever make any decisions regarding your housing entity, make sure a copy of those meeting minutes go over to housing so it's there for the audit, okay? That's another area you can really, really help us. Grants management, home ownership resources, housing needs study. You should do a housing needs study. There's lots of different areas here that you can learn about and increase the knowledge about your programs. That's where our PIH notices are. There's a neg reg, mold remediation, the HUD VASH. There's a link to the uniform guidance, so this is where you go to get all of your knowledge. Besides your HUD office, you can always call them. I could give you the 800, the 800 phone number for the Eastern Woodlands office. It's still there in my head and I still use it, so they put this out here. It's not totally up to date, nor is it accurate, but was put back onto the website within the last couple of months. This is a link that shows you about EPIC and shows you about investing and related information in there. But this is what it looks like right now. What's new on Code Talk, popular topics. This is our ONAP offices and contacts. This is where you guys go also to request free training and technical assistance. You can get it, and there's no reason that you shouldn't. You should all be trained. You're actually, stating that your staff is trained, your board of commissioners is trained, and your tribal council is trained in knowing what your roles and responsibilities are. Get the training. You can do it virtually, come to you in person. It's out there right now. There's monies available. Word of warning, it's not immediate. It usually takes almost 2 to 3 months to go through the process, but then it's free. And then it could be numerous times. So always, reach out to your HUD office and say, hey, we need this. So this is how our HUD offices are broken out. I'm from the Eastern Woodlands, for instance. This is all us, everything east of the Mississippi. You go to where you're at, and there's a couple offices there's one that has a satellite office also. So this is basically a breakdown of what that Code Talk website, the HUD income limits, those are the brand new ones. The NAHASDA statute. So everything is right here, but you have to go out and grab it yourself. Okay. Sign up for what is new on Code Talk. When I tried, and I need to get on there again this week or something, it basically gave me this, but wouldn't let me go through all the way. So hopefully that's up. So make sure that you know the rules for applying your guidance. There's program specific requirements. You have to follow them when they are provided. You have to go to the uniform guidance when program specific requirements are not provided in accordance with 1026. To understand those program requirements, you research first the statute, then the regulations, our PIH notices, our program notices, and then the uniform guidance if necessary. And for Indian Housing Block Grant, program specific requirements are not generally duplicated. It'll just send you to another place. So I used to make copies. I'd start with the statute, get everything out of it that I needed, make copies of all of that. Then I would go to where it sent me or the regs, and then I would go to the guidance and the PIH notices and the program guidances. So that's basically our administration flow, the statute, a law written by Congress, only changed by an act of Congress. Regulations were written to implement the statute, can be waived by the Secretary of HUD, can't conflict with the statute, administered by our Office of Native American Programs. And then we have our transmittals, our notices and our guidances. Those are our official transmittals regarding policy issues, procedural topics. They can't be waived if it relates to the regs or the statute. It mandated negotiated rulemaking when they do anything with our regulations are a formula. And then our guidances were put in place to assist our tribes to implement our programs, tools, program management, and to clarify our technical topics. Now, where you can get in trouble, and I'm going to use, for instance, procurement is the easiest that comes to mind. Your tribal policy, for instance, the threshold might be $250,000. Your tribal procurement policy might be $100,000. And you have one of your housing staff go out and make a procurement for $150,000. You didn't break the federal statute, but you did not listen, or you broke basically the adherence to your housing or tribal policy, and it'll get you in just as much trouble. Okay. Make sure that your policies are up to date and that they know those thresholds. I'm working on a procurement and contracting thing right now. It's one of the things that I'm emphasizing. Make sure all of your staff realize, even though it allows it up here, that if you've got a lower threshold, you have to adhere to your housing and tribal policy. We get in trouble like that. That's an area where we have what they call slippage sometimes. So these are, all of the places that you have to make sure you go all the way down. So as I was talking about procurement, there are, we had a document come out, 2301. It was a revision that allowed higher thresholds, okay? Micro purchasing thresholds greater than 50,000. The tribes, if they wanted to do that, have to demonstrate an organizational and a financial capacity through an institutional risk assessment. So it's not a one and done, but they ease the acquisition burden for our tribes and they streamline our procurement process. Okay, so that is the notice that applies to that. that is up to you if you want to undertake that. And it only applies to NAHASDA money. It doesn't apply to your procurements and things, for your tribe as a whole. NAHASDA itself is what allows that. But you can establish thresholds higher than the micro purchase threshold of 10,000, self-certifying a threshold up to 50,000 on an annual basis. Making sure, that you've got clean audits and there's certain requirements, but these are, again, different decisions that you as tribal council can make. You can make them in several areas when it comes to helping your Native people. Procurement thresholds, wage rates, and I'm not talking about the wage grid, for the tribe. There's different areas where you are allowed to make tribal decisions, some that you have in place already, in contracting and preferences. I'm going to hire any Bay Mills member first. We're the first to be hired, the last to be laid off. NAHASDA allows for certain things like that. So it would behoove you to really read that statute and some of the allowances that were made. And then if you want to, take steps to do things like that, you can do that, like utilizing these higher thresholds if you're doing a lot of building. So that's at 2023-01. So that's your hierarchy. The statute is NAHASDA. The regulations are 24 CFR 1000. Our HUD guidances are our PIH notices, our program guidances, and our uniform guidances 2 CFR 200. It's a self-determination program. You have the maximum flexibility in defining your program within those established requirements. NAHASDA is 54 pages long, color-coded by amendment. Regulations are found at 24 CFR Part 1000. Anything you go ECFR is how you Google that if you don't want to go through Code Talk. PIH notices and our program guidances, you get through the Code Talk website. And the uniform guidance, you can get through that link, or you can do it in ECFR Uniform Guidance Part 200. So remember, that material is not duplicative. So there's other resources out there, past training materials, links, policies, guidebooks, case studies, things like that found on that website. So that basically is all of the training you can get on. This is how you find out where to find our rules, okay? This particular module is housing program structure, your council, your board, your committee, council, things like that. So the structure of your program, your tribal council officials, you have the ultimate overall responsibility for NAHASDA compliance on behalf of the tribe. No matter how you are structured, you are the governing body, okay? Our housing board, our committee, our tribal councils, board members should not be considered for employment within the program except under extremely unusual circumstances. It should be fully documented. It helps with the conflict of interest requirements found from 1030 basically through 36, but 30 and 32 talk about that. Because your housing entity is directly overseen by your housing board or tribal council, it is critical that members of those boards be people with sincere interest in your housing program, okay? Now, depending upon how you are set up, guys, if you are a participant within your programs, you have to follow the rules. You can't owe money. You can't have a TAR, a tenant account receivable. If you have laws about cleaning up your yard or whatever, if you are a program participant of your housing program, you need to be the pillar and the example, because you could be the grievance board. And that is the last thing that you want to do, is have somebody say, hey, any of you guys owe money? Or how come you don't take care of your yard and you've got 5 junk cars there? Or you've got dogs barking and they're not, As a tribal council, you also have to make sure that if you appoint your board of commissioners, that they're doing their job. If they're not, you need to replace them with somebody that will. Your executive director has their hands full as it is, but those are the kind of things that makes it really hard to do that. Okay, that's their direct line of oversight. They have to be accountable. Within my tribe, My tribal council, because I served under them, not a board of commissioners, my staff members, even the new ones that I hired, they were all required to have payroll deductions if they were an employee or if they were a board member, because they could not or they should not be allowed to have an accounts receivable on a program that they have oversight for. Those are just things that you got to make sure that you have in place, okay? So it's a responsibility of your director as the housing professional to ensure that you as board members, the tribal council members, adequately trained in their roles and responsibilities such as this related to housing. You got to ensure that they are provided information to make sound decisions in a, timely manner. You don't hand people the meeting minutes at the meeting, at the table. You're asking them to approve. Those should go out a week in advance. You should onboard your board of commissioners. Come on in. You've been appointed to this position. I'd like to show you, this is a statute. This is how you read your regulations. These are the programs that we offer. These are our policies. They need to have all of that institutional knowledge. They need to be onboarded, okay? HUD offers trainings for tribal council and board of commissioners periodically, just like this. This is what it is. Throughout the country, you can request via Code Talk through a TTA provider to come to your reservation, to provide free of charge these types of training. Make sure your board of commissioners is trained. Make sure your tribal council is trained. Make sure your housing staff is trained. It's a huge component to your success. Your board should engage in the following activities: short and long-term planning for affordable housing, outreach to your families in need of housing. You need to do a housing survey at some point to find out what your needs are. Establishing relationships with your governmental agencies, designing, developing decent, safe, sanitary, and affordable housing. They should engage in professional management, oversight of the program, coordinating and obtaining social services for your residents, providing training and employment opportunities for residents and staff, identifying ways to leverage your block grant funding, utilize some of those other funds, tax credits, USDA is, if you can get USDA on your reservation, it is such an asset. Rural development to achieve goals and objectives. Your staff, your employees are responsible to the members of the tribe for carrying out the activities outlined within your Indian housing plan. They have to follow all the federal laws, the regulations, the policies to provide assurance and build public trust in your program. Your employees need the authority to manage the day-to-day operations of your housing program, ensure your funds are well managed, represent the housing programs within the community, ensure compliance with the federal laws, the regulations, the local policies, develop and administer various programs, whatever you decide you're going to offer, plan the use of resources, organizing those resources to do your job, and ensure that the work is of high quality, delivered on time, and benefit those that are most in need. They need to put participants first within the constraints of the program, possess or obtain skills needed to effectively perform their jobs, treat everyone fairly and equally. That is a huge, I had a tribal council member who was a lawyer, and he said, Cheryl, ask yourself, can I do this for every tribal member that walks in the door and asks me the same thing? And if the request you are hearing, you can't do that, then you shouldn't be doing it. And to this day, that runs through my head every time I make a decision about a policy, about anything that, create an environment that assures quality services, carry out the goals and objectives of your Indian housing plan. Your staff, the success of the program hinges on the quality of your employees. They should have effective communication skills, help them work with your participants, your other staff members, your supervisors. Careful and thoughtful consideration should be given to the hiring process. The best person for any job is the one who possesses the skills necessary to perform the duties required of that position. Now in Indian country, it a lot of times depends on how big that family is. And there is times as directors, they're given employees They find out can't do the job, but they're not allowed to terminate them. They'll say, find something else that they can do. So if you're one of those places, make sure that somebody gets the time to rewrite that staff description of those job duties, because you can't evaluate them from that point forward. It makes it, their job duties, whatever. Everything's got to be rewritten should that scenario happen. And it happens a lot. Just to make sure that everything is kosher and, it works through. You can do the evaluations, you can do, all of that stuff. But participants, your residents, your applicants, they are the primary beneficiaries of our housing programs. Those renters, those home buyers, they have responsibilities. They're detailed in those lease agreements signed with the family before the time of the occupancy of the home. Should they not want to adhere to the terms of the lease, they should be replaced with another willing tribal family. Okay? Bottom line, they need to pay, they need to adhere to the rules. Otherwise, find somebody else that will. They say, you can't come in and do the inspection. I'm not going to give you my recertification. Your A&O policy needs to read that. You will, or we will evict you. Follow your collection policy. You do the same thing regardless of who it is. You're blind to that. And please do not ever, 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 if they go through and get an eviction pushed through, okay, by the time an eviction goes through a court system, they have dotted every I and crossed every T. It is not an easy process. Do not try to overthrow the court system. My tribal council tried to do that once. I said, are you really going to overturn a judge's decision? Do you want to see the paperwork that we had to go through and how many months that this took? Please don't do that to them, because it'll have a very bad effect. They'll say they won't evict us. And nobody will continue paying. You'll have the bottom drops out. And I've seen it happen multiple times. You have to be willing to evict. You work with them. You find out why they haven't paid. You do the recert in case they've lost their money. We have programs that don't allow us to charge, very much money. So they should be able to pay that amount. So this last, part here is on our federal labor standards, Davis-Bacon, other labor requirements, just so you're aware, they're found under the Housing Activities Subpart A of NAHASDA. It's going to give you a little bit of guidance, because sometimes people are not aware of the laws that we have to follow. So when we expend more than $2,000 and it is not a force account crew, okay, or our tribal employees of the housing authority or the tribe's own staff, we have to pay Davis-Bacon. It's a prevailing wage rate. Anything over $2,000. And this is going to give you some information, and we'll talk about tribal prevailing wage rate, a decision you can make as a leader. But this is an area where we have a lot of slippage, okay? So the Davis-Bacon Act, it applies to federal government District of Columbia contracts in excess of $2,000. Primarily public buildings, public works. Where it relates to us is the RA. It's DBRA. It's the related acts. And it comes from how we get our money. So the Federal Aid Highway Act, the Community Development Act, DBRA requires the payment of a prevailing wage on a federally funded or assisted construction contract. Many HUD construction work is not covered by a DBA itself, since HUD seldom contracts directly for construction. Most often, Davis-Bacon wage rates apply to a HUD project because of a labor provision in the Related Act. Okay, so these are the ones that apply to us. The U.S. Housing Act of 37, NAHASDA, if you're getting your money from NAHASDA. So that's enough said as the first two. But it continues on. Our ARA funds, our Economic Recovery Act funds, our Frank Dodd, I was around, we got monies from all of these. That's how it plays into us. So the basic provisions and requirements, contractors, subcontractors, they have to pay their laborers, their mechanics employed directly upon the site of work, at least a prevailing wage rate, which includes fringe benefits, okay? Those standard clauses have to be in any type of contract that you sign. Prevailing wage is a combination of an hourly wage and fringe benefits listed in a wage determination. It is your contractor's obligation to pay at least the prevailing wage, and each contract wage determination can be met by paying, whatever field that is. I'm talking laborers, drywallers, painters, anybody that does a trade, electricians, not the pencil pushers, except, and I mean administratively, it does apply to your engineers and your drafting and your architects. So laborers and mechanics includes those workers whose duties are manual, physical in nature, people who use tools, performing the work of a trade, distinguished from mental or managerial. Laborer mechanic includes apprentices, okay? And you will once in a while get somebody that says, no, I don't have to pay him Davis-Bacon, he's an apprentice. That's not true. They have to be an apprentice in a program approved by the Department of Labor to be an apprentice that does not have to get Davis-Bacon, okay? So you have to make sure that somebody is aware of this within your housing office. So that's an active QR code. There's a worker's pocket guide here to Davis-Bacon. We have basic provisions and requirements, apprentices, trainees, contractors, subcontractors. We have to pay on a weekly basis, okay, on any of these contracts. And there has to be a poster saying, that they are supposed to be receiving Davis-Bacon, such as this on the project. The wage determinations are published on SAM, the System for Award Management website, and you click on there and you pull up your county, and it'll spit out what the current wage rate is. Those have to be put into your contracts. You need to tell all of your contractors that you are subject to Davis-Bacon. So it's on the site of work. So my husband he started driving a truck for an excavator. Somebody built roads and things like that. And he says, babe, do you know anything about Davis-Bacon? And I think he probably would have heard my head hit the counter when I was pounding. Yes, I know all about Davis-Bacon. What do you want to know? First of all, you're a special case. And he's like, what? You're driving a truck. Your truck, you receive Davis-Bacon when you're on the site of work. When you're at your pit, you're not receiving Davis-Bacon. It's when you roll onto the site of work. Well, it also had people fighting about your flaggers and your traffic controllers. If you have them up flipping those stop signs. They published a rule on August 8th that Davis-Bacon pertains to the flaggers and your traffic control immediately or virtually adjacent to your site of work the whole time that they're on site. So they receive Davis-Bacon the whole time, just in case you wanted to know. The requirements are found at 1016 in the regulations. The tribe can adopt what they call a prevailing wage rate, and I will get into that next. As determined by the Department of Labor, have to be paid for laborers, mechanics, all construction, all rehab. Whenever you spend over $2,000, and it's not your tribe or your housing authority staff doing the work, Davis-Bacon kicks in because of the way the money that we get. It prevents contractors from bidding below an area's prevailing wage rate. You go on to SAM, you get your, .gov number, your DUNS number, make sure and then you request that prevailing wage rate. You could even go on YouTube and it will tell you how to pull that down. Okay. Click on the wage determinations. Wage determinations is right here. You click on it and then you go to your county. It's pretty easy, and you have to keep proof in your documents and your procurement documents that you have done that. Now, when you get to this realm, depending on the size of the contract, we have to follow a lot of different labor provisions. It is worth your weight in gold if you don't do a lot of constructions to hire an architect or an engineer to help you with this process to make sure that you adhere to everything. Because you have to certify, you have to have your contracting officer, who is normally your ED, unless you're big and you have your own procurement department, is responsible for doing this. You have to go out and do wage surveys and things like that to make sure that they are receiving the right amount of pay and that they are adhering to all of these other laws. There's the anti-kickback, the Anti-Copeland Act, so that you're not charging them because you're now having to pay Davis-Bacon. They're not charging them, you know, different hold on, I got to go right here. Your payroll deductions are allowable. It will stop you from doing that. You also have the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act. Anything over $100,000, Davis-Bacon, are subject to those overtime hours. You know, anything over 40, they got to get time and a half. There's other different provisions in here that you have to make sure that you adhere to. If your NAHASDA assistance is only being used to assist a home buyer, okay, this is where, if you have a written agreement with the owner or the developer of housing that you're going to provide NAHASDA assistance to help that home buyer, and you have a written agreement in place before they start the construction of that building, Davis-Bacon would actually kick in, okay? That those contracts have to be 2,000 or more, but there's, you know, you have to make sure somebody is watching this, okay? So volunteers, they're exempt from the use of volunteers on projects subject to Davis-Bacon and HUD determined wage rates. They're applicable. You can read about that at 24 CFR Part 70 concerning those exemptions. So the law reads, paragraph A through D of this section shall not apply to any contract or agreement for assistance, sale, or lease pursuant to NAHASDA, or any contract for construction, development, operation, maintenance thereunder, if that contract or agreement for assistance, sale, lease, or otherwise is covered by one or more laws or regulations adopted by an Indian tribe that requires the payment of not less than a prevailing wage, as determined by the Indian tribe, okay? So the paragraphs A through D would not apply to work performed directly by tribal or TDHE employees. So that's what I was telling you about that provision. Or if you adopt what they call a prevailing wage rate, okay? So your Davis-Bacon requirements with homebuyer assistance applies if you have a prior agreement to use NAHASDA to buy that newly constructed homes. It applies to all rental, non-maintenance activities. Does not apply when it's less than $2,000. You have other labor requirements that you have to adhere to. Contracts over $150,000 are subject to the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act. The Copeland Act, which is the allowable paycheck or payroll deductions, or the Fair Labor Standards Act of 38, meaning that you'll pay at least minimum wage and that you will pay them for anything over 40 hours, time and a half. Okay, so this talks and will explain the contract work hours over 150,000. And it'll give you the basic provisions and requirements. And then the Copeland Act, same thing, $2,000 threshold, and what it consists of. And then the Copeland Act, you know, paying at least minimum wage and time and a half. So all of that, you know, they can get violations through Department of Labor. I've had that occur. I have these little books that my guys, they were like the smaller versions of these that were about this big. There's my warning. And they would track when they salted and things like that, when they plowed, in case there was ever a slip and fall. I also had the crews in the area. I had a big box of them. Help yourself. Make sure that, when you're working on a Davis-Bacon job, what you were doing, when you went on, when you came off. I had some guys walk into my office. They said, Cheryl, we'd like to talk about Davis-Bacon. I'm like, I don't have a job going on right now. What's up? And they said, well, it's not you, but we were, 20 miles away at our sister tribe there. And one of the contractors, we think we were supposed to be getting Davis-Bacon, and he didn't pay us. I said, well, and I got him on the phone with the Department of Labor. They had those little teeny notebooks, and they all got back money. And that contractor got hit the debarred suspended list. Let's just put it that way. Because of the fact that they did not take, and receive Davis-Bacon when they should have. So, when you have tribal employees, teach them, help them succeed, make sure that your tribal guys, these guys were members of a sister tribe. I just don't take advantage of our people. And they were able to get that money back through Department of Labor because they could prove where they were, what they did, and what day they did it on, so teach them how to do that to protect themselves. So the federal labor standards, it's a summary of the requirements. Unauthorized deductions are prohibited. You got to make sure that they're paid on a weekly basis. They get premium pay for overtime. You have to make sure that somebody from your tribe is going out in the field and making sure that all of this is occurring. Okay. The thing with, that architect or that engineer that will do that for you, they will, and they're very helpful and they know all the rules, but they're coming from out of town. They're going to send out a meeting notice saying, we're going to have a meeting on this day. So they know what days somebody's going to be checking on site. So I always told them, you tell them there's going to be a lady that comes out here and she's going to have waist length, dark brown hair. And she's going to ask you how much you got paid and what you're doing. And you need to tell her. And I would go out and I would do those, those job surveys basically to make sure that they were actually receiving what they should. So you need a designated labor standards compliance officer for every project that you do of big size. And make sure, that's usually your contracting officer, who is usually your ED, and their hands are full. So, enforcing labor standards compliance from your contractors is really important. You designate appropriate staff for enforcement, ensure your bid documents, your contracts, your subcontracts, they contain those labor provisions for your applicable wage decisions, conduct your contractor wage inquiries, review certified payroll, confirm your discrepancies by interviewing those guys out there, submit the enforcement reports, and maintain all of that documentation. So I believe tomorrow we will get into the portion that talks about how you can set your own wage rate. Brooke, don't leave. She's got something that she needs for you guys to do.
There we go. Thanks so much, Cheryl. That was an incredible first day to the 5-day series. We hope that you guys can give us some feedback in the webinar feedback survey. I'm placing that link for you in the chat right now. They are anonymous, so you don't have to worry about your name or email being connected to it. It lets us at the Native Learning Center know what's working well, what we can improve upon. We do share the feedback with our instructors, so that helps them also. And it takes about 3 minutes to complete, so we'd really appreciate it if you did that for us. We hope you can join us for day 2. That's going to be tomorrow, July 22nd. It will be same time, same place. So it starts at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. We hope you can check out this as well as our other recorded webinars. They are on our YouTube channel. There's a whole playlist called the Cathedra Webinar Archive, where you can find our webinars for about the last 2 years, maybe like 2.5. And please check out our other upcoming training events. We post about them on all of our various social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. And if you are a podcast listener, we have an in-house produced one, the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast, and you can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. But otherwise, that is all that we have for you today. Thanks so much for tuning in for day 1 of the 5-day series. We look forward to seeing you back tomorrow. Thank you, Cheryl, for an incredible presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and shut off the recording, folks.